Hi YouTubers, it's December 1st, 2016. This is another version of the Atom 101 with Kay Corey, and I'm sorry I haven't been with you guys for a few days, but I've been in the recording studio and trying to get some music done. But I wanted to talk about today a little bit about, I think people don't understand why, Fukushima is taking place and why nuclear reactors are in the United States, and we need to actually have a conversation about that. I pulled up an article from France that talks about radiolysis of water. So they knew about water radiolysis, influence of H2 production under ionizing radiation, H2O, making hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2, in the 18th century. Around the time Marie Curie was working with radium and kind of discovering what it does biologically, how it actually changes your physiology and pathology of your body. They were also Rinkin, like the discovery of X-rays by Rinkin in 1895, and then the subsequent discovery of radioactivity by Becquerel in 1896 started to bring about them starting to find out, I guess, what water radiolysis was all about. Now, you got to ask yourself, why would they be so interested in water radiolysis? Why would they be so interested? Because they know chemistry, and because they know that H2O, most humans, most animals and humans are made up of H2O, and that is the molecular structure of your water. And water is very important. It's 78% of the body. Okay, so these guys, Rinkin, Becquerel, discovered all of this radioactivity. Then a few years later, they discovered the chemical changes that water undergoes in aqueous solutions with radium salts in 1902. And the guy Giselle, Giesel, was the first to observe the release of dihydrogen, which is H2, and dioxygen from an aqueous solution of radium bromide. Marie Curie compared this phenomenon to an electrolysis without electrodes. And then in 1909, Kern Baum from the Curie laboratory reported the production of hydrogen peroxide, or H2O2. Now, they're saying that they can only produce small quantities with naturally occurring radionuclides like radium, and so it didn't produce a lot of free radicals in water, the radium, because it is a naturally occurring emitter. And they were looking for something to be more sensitive, so they wanted to observe and report on things that would produce more hydroxyl radicals and more H2O2, and they were also, during the time of World War II, under the Manhattan Project in the United States, Milton Burton's group at the University of Chicago in the United States worked on the mechanism of water radiolysis and hypothesized that hydrogen atoms and hydroxyl radicals were produced. It was also shown that the H and OH radicals convert the molecular products, which is hydrogen dioxide, H2, and H2O2, which is hydrogen peroxide, back to water molecules, and that water used in reactors should be very pure to prevent its radiolytic decompositions. So they discovered that radiolysis did occur, and they wanted to make sure that the water that were in nuclear reactors was pure and not radiolytic. Okay, so then they started, by 1960, several facilities achieved the possibility to perform pulsed electron radiolysis, which is the equivalent of flash photolysis in the field of radiation chemistry. The first confirmation of the presence of a solvated electron through observation of its transient absorption spectrum by means of pulse radiolysis arose in 1962 from Hart and Boyg's experiments. The authors detected a real transient optical absorption around 700 nanometers, and the analogy of the spectrum to that of the electron in ammonia convinced them that the solvated electron it was real. I mean, it was worth. They're saying it's worth stressing that the presence of the solvated electron had been theoretically invoked in Stein in 1952, by Platzman in 1953, and by Weiss in 1953 and 1960. So they were beginning to explore radiation chemistry. They were beginning to introduce ways to quantitatively measure the effect of ionizing radiation, not so much in a somatic form where they were going for, how much radiation killed a physical organism, but they were just starting to get excited over the fact that, H2O could be turned into hydrogen peroxide. And I think that started them thinking, wow, we can kill people really easily with this stuff. So as time went by and units and notations changed, at the beginning of radiation chemistry, the notation M/N was introduced to measure the effect of ionizing radiation, where M was the number of molecules transformed and N is the number of ion pairs formed. Milton Burton in 1952 also suggested to replace this Mn notion by a radiolytic yield labeled as a G value, which represents the number of molecules created or destroyed per 100 electron volts of energy deposited in the system. This notion of radiolytic yield, G, is still widely used today. The units have evolved. The SI unit for the dose is now the gray, which represents 1 joule per kilogram, and radiolytic fields or yields are now expressed in mole, MOL, J minus 1. Okay, so they started working on this in the 50s, and especially around the Manhattan Project. So they were starting to understand that radiolysis of water kills people and kills animals. And then they started to build the reactors that actually proved that, because they started to do the experiments with animals. They then started to inject radioactive carbon. Excuse me for a minute. they started to inject radioactive carbon into dogs, and they started to watch the rates of decomposition of radioactive carbon dioxide. So they started to know about that kind of stuff in the 1950s. And so you can't say these people, these nuclear scientists or these nuclear physicists didn't know that they were causing harm to animals and humans. They knew, and they knew exactly what they were doing from probably about the 60s on, when they started to do the actual Army studies and the field studies in biology and on biological organisms and units, aquatic organisms. They started to just do a wide array of experiments on anything biological and anything, even non-biological stuff. So, matter of fact, the nuclear reactors in Vietnam, the research reactor in Vietnam, South Vietnam, they are very braggadocious about how they were experimenting on all of the different aquatic organisms and the biological organisms. So go and read that. Definitely go and read about that research reactor that was built in 1975 and how they were experimenting on all the biological organisms and aquatic organisms, which are marine organisms. And then ask yourself, what was their end game? Why were they doing experiments on biological organisms and aquatic organisms? What were they planning? Because, see, they don't do things like that sponsored by universities if they don't have any end game in sight. It was all a big eugenics program, and it was all part of the eugenics program. So nuclear has been part of the eugenics program since the inception of its discovery. This is Kay Curry, Atom 101. I don't know much more to say about that, except that, you know, you need to realize that nuclear science, none of it has ever been done for the good of humanity. It's all been studied for the purpose of destruction. Destruction of animals, destruction of humans, from the inception of its birth. Bye for now. Hope you guys are having great holidays.